Starting today, this is our place. Strangers can scram. Whoa, hold on a minute. What's going on with both of you? This was happening right after my mother's funeral had just ended. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law started insulting me, and they wouldn't stop. My husband tried to step in, but they didn't slow down. You're being tricked. Maybe you've been brainwashed or something, they said, laughing. Yeah, it's all because your mom spoiled you. She's the one who raised you this way. Your mom's to blame. When they started bad-mouthing my mom, I couldn't take it anymore. My anger exploded. I could tolerate them saying things about me, but I absolutely couldn't stand them talking about my deceased mother like that. My name is Kathy, I'm 35 years old. I met my husband, David, who's a year older than me, at work, and we got married 5 years ago. I used to live with my mom and my husband. Looking back, a lot has happened in these past 5 years. 5 years ago, I was working at the real estate company my father owned. I've always been interested in how money and people move, so I studied economics in college and applied what I learned to my work. However, there were always people who looked at my success differently. Some thought it was because of my abilities, while others believed it was just because of my parents' influence. For example, when people talked about me, they'd often refer to me as the boss's daughter instead of using my name. On top of that, my husband was the top salesperson at the company, and he was popular with many women. I'd often get cold looks from people because of that. Of course, I know my success wasn't just because of my own efforts. It was also thanks to the cooperation of those around me. Still, being constantly labeled as the boss's daughter really frustrated me. Then, while I was dealing with these feelings, my father passed away. My brother took over as president, and the harsh stares toward me became even worse. You must have messed up, that's why your brother's the president now. Guess we'll have to call you the president's sister, right? Normally, I would have just been frustrated, but at that time, I had just lost my father. Those words were tough to hear when I was already mentally exhausted from his funeral. A single thought crossed my mind: what do I really want to do? Even though I was trying to keep going, something was missing. Then, one day, I found myself saying, I want to be an investor in front of my husband, David. Instead of rejecting my idea, he supported me. When I told my mom I wanted to quit my job and become an investor, she laughed and said, "You didn't have to worry about your father. You should have done what you loved from the start." Despite my father's recent death, seeing my mom's smile made me realize that I had been focusing too much on the negatives. I began to realize that other people's opinions didn't really matter anymore. While I was busy with funeral arrangements, settling the estate, moving, and other tasks, I started my journey as an investor. Of course, things didn't go perfectly at first, but my calm and supportive husband, along with my encouraging mother, were there for me every step of the way. Thanks to their support, the investments I made with my savings and my father's inheritance turned out well. After a few years, my income had grown significantly compared to when I was working at my previous job. On one hand, I felt fulfilled and happy with how my life was going. On the other hand, there were two people who became a constant source of stress: my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. My sister-in-law is 3 years older than my husband and 4 years older than me. She's still unmarried and, from the moment David and I decided to get married, I had the feeling that she wasn't too happy about it. Even my mother-in-law seemed to see me as nothing more than a spoiled rich girl, despite the fact that I worked hard just like any other employee when my father was still the CEO. Every time I visited my in-laws, my mother-in-law would make snide remarks whenever my husband or father-in-law weren't around. "You're such a pampered princess. I bet you can't even do housework properly," she'd say. "It's a woman's job to do the chores, so don't make David do it." But my own mother had taught me a lot, so I could handle things just fine. Since both David and I worked, we helped each other out with the chores. In fact, it was David's idea. But my mother-in-law refused to accept that, and my sister-in-law wasn't any better. She'd often say things like, "It's ridiculous that a woman who makes her husband do housework even got married." Things got even worse after my father-in-law passed away. "It must be nice, huh? Living off David's money and doing nothing at home," my sister-in-law would sneer. I have to deal with so much since my husband is gone, while you live so freely, Kathy. Mother-in-law, as I've told you before, I make my own living as an investor, I'd respond. I'm not slacking off at all. In fact, I have even less free time than I did when I had a regular job. But she'd continue to be fixated on money, especially after my father-in-law's death. She even demanded, if you're really making money, at least give me an allowance. And you can't even have kids? You're a useless wife. With her fixation on money, my mother-in-law seemed to resent the fact that, despite what she considered my privileged and lazy lifestyle, I wasn't under any financial strain. I had become less socially active as I focused more on my work as an investor, but that didn't mean I planned to give my mother-in-law any money. She always acted like she was struggling, yet every time I visited my in-laws, I saw more luxury items around their house. It was obvious where the money would go if I gave it to her. I loved David, he never doubted others and had never done anything to make me doubt him, so I decided not to tell him about the way his family was treating me. There was one time, however, when I confided in my own mother. I asked her, why can't I have children? The uncertainty weighed on me as I approached 35, and my mother-in-law's constant questions about when I was going to have a baby only added to the pressure. Her words, calling me good for nothing, kept echoing in my mind, and I finally broke down in front of my mom. My mother looked puzzled at my outburst. Well, I had you when I was 35, so it's okay. God will give you the right timing, I'm sure, she said, her words comforting me. After that, even when my mother-in-law mentioned children, I was able to reassure myself, children are a gift, and they'll come when the time is right. Just when life seemed to be settling down after those 5 difficult years, tragedy struck. My mother passed away suddenly from a subarachnoid hemorrhage. Losing her, the person who had always been my source of strength, plunged me into deep grief. David, who had lived with my mother for several years, was also hit hard, even though he stayed kind and supportive. We had barely started processing the loss when the funeral took place. Many people came to pay their respects to my mother, who had worked as an executive at my family's company, even after my father had passed away. Among the attendees were my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. To my shock, they didn't even offer condolences. Instead, they just signed the register, as if their presence was a formality. When David returned to the scene, their behavior changed instantly. You may be going through a tough time, but Kathy's pain must be greater, they said, pretending to care about me in front of him. I was emotionally exhausted from the funeral and the past few days when, later at home, the doorbell rang. David, always considerate, answered the door and found my mother-in-law and sister-in-law standing there, thinking they had come to comfort me. He welcomed them in without hesitation, but as soon as they entered the living room, they looked at me with disdain and then said something completely unexpected. Starting today, this is our home, outsiders should leave, my mother-in-law declared. Mom, David exclaimed in shock, but she kept talking. Up until now, we tolerated you because your mother was here, but now, only unemployed Kathy is left. If you stay with a woman like her, you'll be ruined. We'll live with you now, so you should divorce Kathy. What are you saying, Mom? And what do you mean by unemployed? I've told you many times, Kathy is an investor, David protested. When you say investor, it sounds like a real job, but all she does is play around buying and selling stocks. How can a woman like that be a good wife? You can do much better, my mother-in-law replied. David, clearly upset, asked, what do you mean by badmouthing Kathy? What are you trying to say? Kathy earns her own money, don't call it playing around. You've been brainwashed, my sister-in-law chimed in. It's because she's been with her mother all the time. Kathy's mom spoiled her, and now she's turned out like this. I get why you want to defend her, David, but it's her mom's fault for raising her like this. At that moment, my anger, which had been simmering, finally exploded. I could tolerate them insulting me, but I would never tolerate them speaking ill of my deceased mother. Stop speaking badly about my mother, I shouted, unable to hold back any longer. I was furious, glaring at my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but instead of showing fear, they just smirked. Okay, I get it. You don't like us talking about your mom, huh? My mother-in-law sneered. Now that the mom who spoiled you and let you be a shut-in is gone, it must be hard to hear the truth. I looked down at my trembling fist, trying to control my anger. I took a deep breath, about to say something, but David spoke first. Enough is enough, Mom, David said firmly. Don't insult Kathy or her mother. Kathy isn't a shut-in, she's a real investor. My mom and I have supported her all along. If she was just playing around, we wouldn't have stood by. Everyone, including me, was shocked by David's calm but stern voice. My mother-in-law, clearly caught off guard, began to stammer. Don't be so angry, David. Still, Kathy's lifestyle has been possible because of your earnings, right? Didn't you let her live in luxury, buying this high-rise condo? Poor David. If you just live with us, we'll do all the housework. All we need is a small allowance. That's it. Don't you get it, Mom? David interrupted, clearly frustrated. This apartment isn't mine, it's Kathy's. My mother-in-law gasped, her eyes wide. What? This apartment is Kathy's? Yes, David confirmed. It's part of the inheritance from her father, and the title is in her name. We split the living expenses equally, and for the record, Kathy earns more than I do. Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were stunned. They clearly hadn't imagined that I could be earning more than David. My mother-in-law, now speechless, sank back into silence like a defeated person, sensing the situation slipping. My sister-in-law spoke up, her voice shaking. That can't be true. How can an investor make more money than someone working for a company, just by buying and selling stocks? I don't know about other investors, but Kathy has a talent for it. That's a fact, David said. And you have the nerve to belittle her? This is our home. You both need to leave, now. Panic filled my sister-in-law's eyes. Wait, hold on. We sold our house, thinking we could live here from today. Both David and I cried out in shock. You sold your house? Why didn't you tell us? We thought we could live here with you, she admitted. We didn't have money, and I quit my job assuming you'd help us out. If you don't let us stay, we're in serious trouble. Mom, say something, she pleaded, shaking her dazed mother. But my mother-in-law, still in shock from David's words, remained unresponsive, desperate. My sister-in-law turned to me, clinging to my arm. Kathy, please, I'm sorry, talk to David for us. We can't survive like this. You said you sold your house, which means you should have plenty of money for now, I replied coldly. Hearing this, my sister-in-law snapped, her tone flipping from pleading to angry. Don't get smart. Just because your investments did well doesn't mean you can talk back. Don't get carried away. Enough, David's voice boomed, cutting her off. His words echoed through the room, and my sister-in-law fell silent, clearly realizing she had pushed too far. David gave them a sharp look and said, forget about the house. I won't even ask for my share. Just get out right now. He practically pushed his mother and sister out and locked the door. For a while, they kept ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door, but eventually, it went quiet. Later, we heard from relatives that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had rented a cheap apartment and were living together. Their old house, located in a remote area, didn't sell for much, and the land was inexpensive. My sister-in-law struggled to find a decent job, and soon they ran out of money. Even then, they hadn't learned their lesson and tried to rely on David and me several times, but we always turned them away. They ended up selling all their luxury items and now barely get by working part-time jobs from morning until night. Meanwhile, I've been able to enjoy my life as an investor, free from their negative comments, and next year, we're planning to welcome a new member to our family, just as my mother had predicted. I'm truly grateful for the blessings that came at the right time.